I'm going to say a few words about Chris Hayes' book, What's Divine About Divine Law. Professor Hayes' starting point really is actually my starting point is going to be the fact that in the city of Quitman, Georgia, it turns out it's illegal for chickens to cross the road. Okay. When I thought about this, I thought when I was a kid, I had a book, as perhaps many of you did, or maybe this is just like a geeky thing that people want to study the law. I had a book of crazy laws that were on the books, right? Laws that just make no sense, or make no sense in our time period, right? So the starting point for Professor Hayes' book is the Greco-Roman idea that divine law is divine because it connects with some kind of eternal, natural, unchanging order. Okay, it's not some arbitrary law of the gods that was handed down, but that it follows the natural order. Okay? If we look in the Bible, she outlines a few different conceptions of what law might be. One might be that law is law because it emerges from God, not because it emerges from some kind of from the natural law system, from the system of nature. There's also a second idea that there is a moral order to creation. Imagine Abraham negotiating with God about about how God will the Lord of all the earth deal justly. There's also another sort of historical narrative, imagining that there could be some kind of development within law. And the starting point then is sort of 10 different formulations that Professor Hayes lays out for the apparent dichotomy between natural law and positive law. And these discourses usually see divine law as unchanging, unlike human law, like the law in Quitman, Georgia, where it's illegal for chickens to cross the road. So, the centerpiece of the book, to my mind, is three antique, what I would say is Jewish, responses to the tension between biblical and Greco-Roman conceptions of law. One, what she calls bridging the gap. The similarity between natural law and divine law is emphasized. Think about Philo. Philo uses, through metaphor and so on, a way to sort of bridge the law in the Bible and the natural order of things. Okay, this is also seen in Enoch, in Jubilees, in wisdom literature, and so on, that we can bridge that gap. The second antique response, the difference between natural law and divine law is emphasized. Paradigm here is Paul, right? A representation of Mosaic law as temporary. The natural order is eternal. Divine law is something that is temporary, that then gives way. Okay? That instead, right, the Mosaic law is written for its specific audience. Okay? So we have bridging the gap, Philo. We have minding the gap, this is Paul. And what the rabbis do. To my mind, this is one of the most important contributions of the book, right? Rejecting that dichotomy of natural law and divine law in a couple ways. Number one, the Torah can, in her words, defeat truth. So what this means is what Paul sees as a vice, right, that gap between divine law and natural law, the rabbis actually see as virtue. That is to say, the Torah isn't necessarily rational and appealing to the natural order, and in fact, the Torah is flexible because it is divine and can respond. Let me read a little excerpt from this idea that the Torah can actually overcome rationality, be true. Let me give you a little piece here. Moses said to him, "Lord of the universe, didn't you grant me the power of annulment of oaths by saying if a man makes a vow, he shall not break his pledge? That is, he himself cannot break his own pledge, but a scholar can absolve his vow if he consults him. And any sage who gives instruction, if he wants others to accept his decision, he should be the first to observe it. Since you have commanded me concerning the annulment of vows, it is only right that you," Moses says to God, "seek to annul your vow, as you have commanded me to annul the vow of others." Here, Moses imagines God coming to Moses to annul, right, divine law. Okay? So, in this way, we can imagine that the Torah can overcome rationality, can overcome truth, if you will, which, again, rejects the sort of dichotomy and perhaps could imagine some sort of developmental process, if you will. Does this mean that there is some kind of, is there a natural law that the rabbis recognize outside of divine law? Professor Hayes says no, that the rabbis, had some idea of natural law. They obviously recognize the Noahide laws, but they reject this as their own idea of law. They invert the Hellenistic idea that natural law is eternal, and they bridge this gap. Now, the rabbis are ridiculed for their belief in law as divine, but not unchanging. Right? Again, one of the, I think, interesting vignettes that Sheena and I can talk about is Professor Hayes interviewed students about divine law, right? What makes law divine? And the idea is, one idea is that law is unchanging. It's difficult for us to imagine that God could lay down the law one way in one moment and that might change. And of course, this is something that the rabbis, again, turn on its head. Now, I think the book is interesting for bringing this moment in the idea of law in the rabbinic period to the fore, because the medieval and modern periods sort of reestablish this dichotomy. I think particularly of how Maimonides in the guide is attempting to show how there is a rationality even to laws which we think of as chukim, laid down without any kind of reason to them, without being in the natural order. So they return this dichotomy to the system, but I think this moment in the idea of law is very important. One question that I might have, or maybe one direction that Professor Hayes might think of in thinking about where to direct the book, is, again, to return to where I started with the example of Quitman, Georgia. That is to say, there are those on, say, the American Supreme Court who think about the law in many ways as unchanging, right? And so how does that jive with the idea that at some point, maybe, as there are sociological changes, that those ideas, no longer fit the sort of rational order, if you will. So, please.